One of the keys to a successful digital transformation or enterprise technology implementation is the system integrator that you work with. The bad news is that not all system integrators are good. There's a lot of variety and a lot of variation in the quality and results that you see in the enterprise tech space as it relates to system integrators and technology implementation partners. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today is the state of the union of the technology implementation space, specifically focusing on system integrators and what to look for within the system integrator space. And also, we're going to dive into some quantitative data here. This is really the only conversation I think I ever have where we're not just talking about qualitative experience. We're talking about quantitative, real results and objective data. And joining me today is Bonnie Tinder, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But before I do, real quickly, we're live streaming to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and X, I believe it is, as well. Or I already said that. Twitter, X, whatever. We're on either or both. So thanks for being here. We're watching the chat. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to drop that in the chat. We'll keep an eye on the streams across all the platforms. And to start, I'd love to hear where everyone's joining. So if you don't mind just dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from, would love to hear from you here today. Secondly, this live interview becomes part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast. So thank you for being part of the live production. And again, we'll talk here today about the system integration space, the system integrator space, technical implementers. How do you find that right technical implementation partner? And joining me to unpack this conversation is Bonnie Tinder, the CEO and founder of Raven Intel. Bonnie, thanks for being here today.
Eric, thank you so much for having me. It's going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, I always love having you on the show because this is literally the only conversation I have on the podcast or even just day-to-day industry discussions with someone who has real data to back qualitative observations and things that I think a lot of us may see and feel in the space, but you've actually got some data to back all this. And that's what I'm really excited to dive into here today, because it's been a while since you've been on the podcast, and I'd love to hear what trends we're seeing and what some of the updates are. But before we get into some of the questions that I've got for you and the audience has for you, I'd love to hear from you. You know, you started the company in 2018, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And one thing I remember when you started it, because we knew each other at the time, or right around the time you started the company, I remember thinking, why has no one ever done this before? And why is this such a novel idea in this space? You know, you have Yelp, you have Google reviews, you have all these things in the consumer space that you can use to see what your peers are rating certain services or restaurants or bars or whatever. But in the enterprise tech space, it was something that was really lacking. So what led you down this path of starting Raven Intel? And maybe tell us a little bit about what Raven Intel is too, while you're at it, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, you know, Eric, it's a great parallel that you bring between what we do in a Yelp or TripAdvisor. So the essence of our business is all around voice of customer. And we get the real feedback from the customers who are actually going through these implementations. And where I really saw a need in the marketplace was not even so much with the software. I mean, when I had started the company 8 years ago, there was G2 Crowd, there was Gartner Peer Insights, Capterra. I mean, they're a dime a dozen. There's so many software review sites out there. But what was really lacking and what nobody was looking at was the implementation and the partners that were responsible for it. So despite all of these review sites where you can see, you know, what users are saying about the usability of the software, there was no place to look to say, well, what's the experience of the team that's implementing this stuff? Were they able to get it live? All, you know, these other firms are looking at, and I consider them peers because they're looking at software features and functions, and all of that is really important. But the lens that we look at is, what was the effort to get this project live, and the consulting partner who is helping you through that. And as you mentioned at the top of this broadcast, not all partners are created equal. And all the good software in the world does not matter a lick if you do not have the right partner helping and guiding you in the the transformation project. So that's really the need that I saw. That's what we built since 2018. Right now, we have over 4,000 reviews of these projects, right? These are not small projects. These are transformation projects of everything from SAP to Oracle, Workday, and other major HCM systems. So UKG, Dayforce, et cetera. And, again, the lens that we look at and everything that we care about is voice of customer as it relates to the transformation success and the implementation of the software. So that's what makes us unique. That's why I started the company. And excited to talk about some of what we're hearing.
And it's important to note too, and just to clarify for the audience here, that these aren't, this isn't sort of an open, it is an open review site, but I can't go on there as a system integrator. I can't go on there and self-assess myself. It's a vetted, you guys vet out and confirm and validate that it's an actual end customer that's writing the reviews, right?
1,000,000%. And we vet that it's not an AI generated review either. And that's where I think some of our other peers have really, with the volume that they're handling, oh my goodness, I can't imagine how they have to, parse out the bot created reviews. Cause that's a real concern in our industry.
Yeah.
Every single one of our 4,000 reviews. And I mean, every single one of them, we have the email address, the business email address of who wrote it. We are looking up their LinkedIn profile and we are verifying back at that business address that what they said is valid. So every single one of the reviews that we have on our site, we stand behind and we know it was written by a human and a human who knew about that project. It's a huge, important differentiation point, but we have only 4,000 reviews. I mean, I think that's definitely a great sample set. On the other hand, we don't have 1,000,000 that, sort of gets unwieldy and you're almost incapable of verifying the legitimacy of those. So it's something we take very important. Our business is all about trust.
Right. Now, before I jump in and start asking you about some of the trends you're seeing in the data as of late, I want to turn to the audience here real quickly and ask the audience a question here. This is not at all scientific. This is just a informal survey I wanted to get going here with in the chats. But I'd love to hear what your general experience has been with systems integrators. For those of you that have hired or worked with a system integrator in the past, is it A, great, B, terrible, or C, somewhere in between or mixed? And I know might be hard to answer that as a broad generalization. It probably depends on which system integrator you're referring to. If you've worked with multiple, but love to hear your thoughts in the chat. So just drop that in the chat, A, B, or C, on what your experience has been. And I also want to say hello to a few people in the audience before we get too far into this. Sam Graham joining from Spain, who I continue to be envious of in his semi-retirement living in Spain. Darian on LinkedIn says, good morning. Good morning, Darian. Demetrio says the right software pales in comparison to the right partner to drive the change and adoption work needed. It's very consistent with what you just said, Bonnie. Yep. And oftentimes technology is the least of your worries, when you're going through a project like this. So finding that right implementation partner, that right that right person that not only understands the technology, but it can also bridge the gap between your business and what the software can do. Hello to Brian on YouTube joining from Dublin, Ireland. And then Sam Graham says they're very good at billing hours. So you didn't answer the question though, Sam. Is that A, B, or C on the survey? But you're right; they are very good at billing hours, and that's a point. Even though I think you might be saying that a bit tongue in cheek, Sam, that is a good point in that oftentimes, when you go through these projects, it's usually the system integrator is the only one that's ensured profitability and success. The implementing organization is not necessarily, and if there's any overruns or the risks of the project primarily fall on the end customer. So that's why it's so important to make sure you find that right partner. So I'll leave the question up here for a moment. Love to hear your thoughts on A, B, or C on your responses here. But Bonnie, just to get started, what are some of the biggest shifts you've seen in the system integrator space over the last 12 to 18 months? The last time you and I spoke about this, the world has changed quite a bit, with wars and AI, and the tech space is being disrupted in many ways. I mean, what are you seeing any patterns in the data or things that are emerging recently?
Yeah. Well, I think there is the ability to, create a higher velocity for projects because you are able through AI tools to handle things like documentation, and system requirements a lot faster. Fast doesn't necessarily equate to quality, but I think as more and more of these tools are being used within the project, It's helping to create faster communication and better documentation. Whereas things in the past, it was so difficult to get your scribe to, or your historian to document a project. Now with some of the AI tools, that has become a lot better. So that's a step in the right direction. I think it's also easier for firms to onboard new staff, and probably, provide a better aggregate set of onboarding materials for newer staff. What does that mean? That means that I think SIs are hiring or have the ability to hire younger people who can get up to speed faster. Does that mean that they're adding more people to their team as a result of some of these? I don't think that we're seeing that. And it's not like there's now tons of opportunity for young, unskilled workers within this group. However, it is faster to train and onboard employees or consultants based upon, using some of the tools, and the agents, et cetera, for training. So I would say that's a step in the right direction. Have we seen the cost of implementations decrease as a result of this? I haven't seen any evidence of that yet in our data. I think the cost of implementations continues to be, pretty high. However, I think more and more as these implementations become faster and can be run with fewer SI resources, that we should see the costs go down in the future. So those are some of the major things.
So too early to tell if AI is materially going to impact the SI costs. I mean, we can hypothesize that it probably will, but you haven't yet seen it in the data.
I have not seen customers remark how AI has made that material impact on the return on investment or the time or the speed to live. I'm sorry, we've seen the speed to live go up, but we haven't seen the cost to go live come down like that. I think in the future, though, that's going to change. My prediction is that AI native delivery is going to potentially cut implementation time by 25 to 30%, probably within the next year or so.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point, and something that I think is going to be a really interesting dynamic, because now you've got sort of a conflicting incentive here for system integrators. It's if you introduce AI, back to Sam Graham's point a moment ago, they're not able to bill hours as much as they did before. And that's a real dilemma, I think, especially for these bigger consulting firms that are so dependent on tons of billable hours and tons of junior resources that are doing a lot of the grunt work that AI can do for you now.
Yeah.
One other thing I want to share, shameless self-promotion here. Third Stage has an AI tool that we use during our implementation projects and our selection projects with clients. It's called Mission Control AI. If you scan the QR code right here, you can learn more about it. But it's a tech agnostic tool that we use during any sort of enterprise technology implementation to capture a lot of that tribal knowledge that you're talking about, Bonnie. And it's also a way for clients to take control back from the system integrators that oftentimes are taking too much ownership of the project, and the companies themselves aren't taking as much ownership. That AI tool set is not only making things faster and cheaper for our clients, but it's also a way for clients to make sure that they have all their tribal knowledge documented in one place, and that they have access to all the information in the project and can be more efficient in the process. So I'll leave that up for a second. If you'd like to learn more, it's a really cool tool that we've developed with our partners at 𝘗𝑡r. I want to get to a couple audience points and questions here. Luke on LinkedIn says phase 0 is the most important phase of a project, which totally agree with you on that. And phase 0 typically would include finding that right system integrator or those right technical resources to support your project. Sam Graham has another follow-up comment here on LinkedIn. Good people can make a bad system work, but bad people can't deliver good systems. Very well said. And I think that's really the theme of a lot of what your data shows too, Bonnie, is you could be implementing the perfect technology, the right fit for your organization, but if you've got the wrong partner, it almost doesn't matter that you found that right technology, because you can't figure out how to use it, or you haven't been able to deploy it effectively. Someone on
And
LinkedIn
I'll tell
says,
you that to add on to that point too, what we've seen is the selection process is so single-threaded to finding the software and not necessarily on creating a good project plan and getting the right partner lined up, that by the time that they select the software based on, the multiple RFPs and choices and vendors that they have in, it's like implementation is the afterthought. Whereas, I mean, in my mind, you need to do a 50-50 split, spend as long considering the implementation process and project that you have in place and your partner as you do selecting the software. Because like Sam said, all the good software in the world is meaningless if you have a bad implementation.
Yeah. Very well said. Here's an interesting comment on LinkedIn that I want to get your insights on, Bonnie, in terms of if you have data that supports this thought. But I apologize, I don't see the name of the person here, but someone on LinkedIn said fixed price implementation is a powerful position that improves early conversations and discovery.
Yep.
Have you seen a correlation between fixed bid contracts or fixed bid proposals and customer satisfaction, overall success?
Yeah. Well, fixed bid works in some scenarios, and the idea of fixed bid implies a box that has very specific deliverables in scope. And so we see fixed bid implementation typically with mid-market, smaller enterprise clients, or implementations that are not necessarily a large scale rollout, right? So it's maybe a single module, et cetera. And fixed bid, what's really nice about that is that, number one, it really speeds up the selection process of, because, you don't have to map out a jillion requirements for implementation, because there's like a set of menu delivered aspects to, you get this if you go with this implementation fixed price to implement, solution X, Workday, Oracle, et cetera, right? And it's like, I've heard it referred to as like the launch methodology. And I even, heard one of the vendors that is saying for mid-market accounts, it's 45 to 60-day implementation. So, that sounds really good. And for some clients that have very minimal needs or are very small organizations, it does make sense. They don't need the big guns from, a management consulting perspective or process change, because they're sort of starting with nothing anyways. And so in those vanilla cases, a fixed bid is really attractive. Where it loses appeal, though, is when the client needs a lot of process reengineering, change management within the organization. They're dealing with multiple silos of data and teams that need, I think, a more unified project plan and more hand-holding than a fixed bid implementation would provide. So in those cases, the promise of this fixed bid, sometimes it's it doesn't live up to delivering a good result from those implementation, because it misses all of those really expensive things that are not included, like change management, like process reengineering, et cetera, that a larger scope project would potentially capture.
And what's even worse is they'll skip those things because they're out of scope typically for the fixed bid projects, and they skip them, and they can turn back and say, well, we delivered at a fixed cost a working technical product, but that's different than we delivered a technology product that's actually being used by the organization and operationalized and actually getting business value. But those are two totally different things. And so you have to be aware of what you're paying for, what you're asking for. Are you asking for the guaranteed fixed bid cost, and that's what's most important to you? Or do you want to have other governance and guardrails in place to keep things on track, but yet be flexible as things evolve throughout a project?
Yeah, exactly. So what you don't want to do is like go with the route, which is like your mess for less, essentially, which is, taking a mess and creating it, just taking that mess and porting it into a new piece of software. I mean, it's really easy to turn the flip a switch and get the data there. It's yet another to really think through, what needs to change in the process of moving systems as well. And I think that really is what you miss when you're doing a rapid implementation or an install that doesn't, account for some of those other things, Eric, that you just mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. This is from Colin on LinkedIn. Colin says, great conversation here, joining from Maryland. I've had mixed experience with systems integrators because of factors like inadequate requirements gathering, hidden costs, and rushed go lives. That's a really important point, and it actually ties to what you just said, Bonnie, around some of the risks and pitfalls of fixed bid contracts, is because now you've created a perverse incentive for the vendor to spend as little time and resources as possible on your project, because that's how they maximize their profit, is to do it as fast as possible and do it as cheaply as possible. That's going to ensure that they get that margin that they're looking for. But that's not necessarily the right answer for you as an organization. So I think it's fixed bid contracts, to me, are sort of not a fallacy, but it creates a false perception, a false sense of security that, oh, I've totally mitigated risk now because I've gotten my system integrator to agree to a fixed bid cost. You haven't really, in my opinion, you haven't really changed the risk profile at all. You've just changed the risk, what types of risk you're dealing with. You just shifted it from one risk bucket to another. So you can't just assume that that's going to solve your problems, because it actually just creates new problems.
Yeah. And if you go with this, cheapest quote, many times that vendor knows exactly that they're going to make up the difference in change orders down the road. And that's one of the things that we ask on every single one of our reviews is, was the project properly scoped, or did you have some change orders or significant change orders? And I will tell you that about 40%, so 4 out of 10 projects have some or significant change orders. Does the customer always blame the SI for that? And is there a rampant, bait and switch going on? Not necessarily. Some partners, I would say yes. However, it is a lot of times that the customer said, we got involved with the project and we thought we knew what we wanted. However, we had changes internally, our leadership changed. All of a sudden, we added something new to the project that we didn't have on the table previously. So, there's a level of, you're going to encounter, likely encounter some change orders. However, if you're going with an SI that has a track record of underscoping and, over change ordering, you're going to be able to see that in the data and the reviews from other clients. So look them up on ravenintel.com and you're going to see the worst offenders.
Yeah. Well, speaking of best and worst offenders, let's start with the best offenders. Based on your data, who are some of the consistent top performers in the system integrator and consulting world, and what is it that makes them stand out in your data sets?
Yeah. Well, there's some themes with top performers. Number one, in general, they are rating either a 9 or a 10 in satisfaction on every project. Does that mean that the client always rates the software vendor or the software project itself a 9 or 10? No. However, it means that they are rating the partner themselves and the consulting team that gets brought in either a 9 or a 10 on almost every single project, despite the challenges with it, right? So the top 10% of our SIs rate a 9.3 out of 10 average, as well as they have over 50 reviews, because they are consistently asking for feedback from their customers and are looking for that level of transparency and are very proud to put their clients in a position where they're giving public reviews on projects. That is a huge statement. When you have a client or an SI who is saying, we have delivered a high rate of customer success, how can you really prove that except with, the slides that the guys, in business development put up during the sales process? Well, it's easy to see those trends if they have public reviews, sort of like a restaurant out on Raven Intel, right? So the best firms are running to getting reviewed and are also consistently getting, high marks from clients as well. What are the traits? Governance first. So they bring in a strong PMO and clear escalation paths. So they're really good in the responsiveness category, and they're really good in the quality of consultants category. They're rating a 5 out of 5 or a 4.75 out of 5 in general. So governance first. Number 2, bringing in the right people and the right fit. 90% of projects that are staffed with experienced certified consultants from start to finish and who do not churn during the project life cycle are the happiest. The big issue we see is when the project team changes some or multiple times. So we ask the question, did your team change some of the time, many times, or did they stay intact? We can almost correlate to 1-to-1. When the team has significant turnover, I guarantee that overall satisfaction and success of the project is going to be low too. So you want to keep the team intact, and you want to go with somebody who has a track record of not, we're going to send in our A players for, months 1 through 3. And then all of a sudden we're going to swap them out with the offshore resources or, the junior, the JV team, once it's going to be too hard for you to disentangle yourself from us. So you do not want the churn on a project. You want to almost to a contract level say, this is the team that we were assigned. If there's a change on this team, you guys are paying us extra or something. Again, there's different ways to do that. And Eric, you have lots of great attorneys that you work with, helping with contractual agreements and things like that. But getting that team structure assigned in the contract itself or statement of work is a really big deal. And finally, they have change management embedded in the process. So not only are they looking to, flip on the light switch and get them live, but there is training and adoption planned in parallel with the build of the plan. So you want to make sure that that's accounted for in the course of the project. Those are always the project with change management, as part of an integral part of that project plan, is important. So the quote that I came up with for this area, leaders don't get you just live, they get you adopted. And in 2025, adoption is the real measure of success. It's not, did you switch systems? It's, well, is that system delivering the value you thought it would during the sales process? And those are the best. I can name some of them, just off the bat, people who are, or firms that are delivering like consistently well, right? In the UKG ecosystem, we have 𝘐𝑎rchitect, we have Cibility, we have RSM, we have Ascend, we have Highbridge. We have within the SAP ecosystem, we have folks like Rising and Jigsaw Cloud and Talent Team. We have, other groups in one of the other ecosystems that we have as well. But those are like literally off the top of my head where I can go down and look in the detail of what clients are saying and tell you without any hesitation, they're consistently delivering good work. And you want to find that partner who's a good fit for you, but also has the proof from customer results that what they're saying is true as well.
Yeah. It's crazy to me that you have to call out learning and adoption. Like you're saying that the top performers have learning and adoption embedded in their plan. And to me, my knee-jerk reaction to that was, why wouldn't you have that? Like, I'm shocked that are there a significant number of SIs that you see that maybe aren't scoring as high because they're not doing that sort of stuff?
Well, I think that, back to our conversation about fixed bid implementations or, the implementations that are, whittled back to only include the must-haves, right? Change management, is in there. Sometimes that's an easy one to cut because customers think, oh, we'll handle that on our side. We have good, change processes internally. We got that, and we don't have to spend a bulk of the implementation dollars on this because it's not like a hard cost, so to speak. Yeah. And those are the ones like the contracts that shortchange change management are the ones that really have some issues.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. Here's a comment.
The other, Eric, the other area of training, it's not that they don't have it, but it's like a check the box sort of training. Like, oh, we have a help menu. That's training, right? I mean, or like we sent out recorded webinars on this. I mean, like there's many degrees of training.
True. Yeah, it might be training light where, hey, we've got boilerplate generic training materials. We'll give them to you, Mr. or Mrs. Client. You go train your end users. And that's a lot easier said than done. And to your point about change management, I think a lot of companies think, how hard can it be? I mean, we're all excited for this new system. It's not going to be hard. But then, you get halfway through the project, you realize, oh, actually, it is very difficult, especially because these tools are so robust now that our jobs are going to be entirely disrupted with AI and other types of tools.
Yeah.
This is a really long question. It's a 4-part question. So I'm going to try and summarize this. And this is from John Belden on LinkedIn. For those that don't know John, he's with a company called Upper Edge, and they help, part of what they do is they help clients negotiate with, so John. If you don't know John, follow him on LinkedIn. Their company, he's a great guy, really well known in the space, and their company is as well. But his 4-part question is revolving largely around AI. So let me just try and condense this into a shorter question. But how do you see AI affecting the quality of people and deliverables? And, because in the past, if I back up, before AI, it mattered tremendously that you, Bonnie, are an expert in this system. You know how it works inside and out. That's why I'm hiring you, because you can come in and you can help do all the stuff that I can't internally. But now with AI, it's not that that's not important. It's just that now there's a tool that maybe takes some of that pressure off you being the sole expert, or my dependency on you maybe is a little bit lessened because of AI. How do you see AI affecting, how you evaluate or how we should be thinking about SIs going forward and their individual resources as well?
And here's where I see the voice of customer being so important. So what's the track record with other projects? And if you cannot find any other evidence of that would show the quality of consultants from other similar projects, then that's going to be a really tough one to verify. So John, how do you vet the fact that you're getting a really senior consultant on your project who has who really brings the expertise to the table and is not just some facade held up by a good generative AI who sounds good? I would say that's really where the importance of references, talking to other clients, looking up their reviews comes in, because other clients are going to sniff that out pretty quickly if they present really well during a meeting, and then when it comes to actually consulting, are not able to do the job. So I would say this is where you really have to vet your players, because right now anybody can look super credible with some of the polished video and the polished presentations that are possible. I mean, even these startups that I'm seeing are like putting out content that looks amazing, and you think they're this huge company, when really it's just a couple of kids who can be masterful with AI and create this really professional looking stuff. And when you get down to it, it's like they have, 2 customers and they're still an MVP. So all of this to say, John, I think the idea of getting qualified references who are like you or like the customer, that will verify the fact that, the skill and the quality is legit is absolute paramount.
Yeah. Now, what about, customer expectations around AI? I was reading an article a few weeks ago about, I think it was in the UK, and I might have mentioned this when I was on your podcast a few months ago, this same article, because it came out right around the time you had me on your podcast. But it was talking about how PwC in the UK, I believe it was, a lot of customers are demanding that they lower their fees because PwC is out there touting like, hey, we've got all these AI tools, we're totally changing consulting and the value to clients, blah, blah, blah. But then the customers weren't seeing any material changes to the effort and scope and cost and all that stuff. So they were basically coming back to PwC and saying, hey, if you're saving all this time and money for yourselves, you should be passing that on to us. So I'm just curious though, are customers outside that one article, that one use case, or that one example, are you generally seeing customers that voice a customer wanting more AI tools to make this a more efficient and streamlined and effective process with system integrators? Or is it more the system integrators are starting to push it to the customers?
I think that it's expected from customers that their AI, and that, you know, the SIs that they're looking at use AI in some way, right? But I think what they're more important about is how does that manifest within a project? How does that manifest to benefit me as the end customer? You know, what is it about it that's faster, cheaper, and more efficient than, you know, your competitor that I'm also looking at? You know, I think the term AI is like the equivalent of saying, oh, we use computers. Well, I mean, that's like pretty broad. How do you use AI, right? I mean, like, are your guys using, you know, Chat GPT to ask questions? And like what does that mean? Right. So I think, you know, what's really on the shoulders of customers is to ask, well, what specifically are you going to bring with AI or provide me with in terms of tools that are going to, you know, that are relevant to this project? Because if all they're using AI to do is, you know, bill and record meetings, that's not really going to help me. I mean, recording meetings actually is pretty helpful sometimes, but you know, like it's like, give me some examples of where that is a change from what you've done in the past and why that makes you a better SI choice for me than the other guy that I've invited in as well. And I think you have to sort of define, what does AI mean? Because, like, again, it's a super vague term.
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. Now, what about looking at red flags? What are some of the most common red flags you see in customer feedback that organizations should look out for before hiring a partner? You mentioned some of the risks of fixed bid. You talked about maybe underscoping or ignoring change management, training, enablement. What else? Are there other red flags that you commonly see in the data?
Yeah. So bait and switch staffing, we talked a little bit about this before, but that churn on a project team is really painful. So the senior, you know, varsity team comes in the beginning of the project, and then you got JV post contract. So you want to make sure that there are no signs of that project churn or significant project churn from an SI. And so back to, how do you guard against that? You know, get in your statement of work the team that is going to be assigned, and put, repercussions that churns. The other aspect is a high rate of turnover within the organization. So ask, you know, what's your turnover rate with your consulting team in general? And what, and I've known this firsthand. So, you know, midpoint in my career, I worked for consulting firms. So I knew how the game is played. When I first joined the organization, we were an A+ consulting firm. And for the first year that I was there, I mean, the talent on the team was amazing. At the time I was in marketing, it was easy. It was easy to get customer feedback and quotes and references and all of those things. I mean, we were in our glory days. Well, something happened. There was a leadership change, you know, and an acquisition that happened. And all of a sudden, in the course of 2 or 3 months, we had a mass exodus. And to the blind eye and some customer who was looking at this organization, they would have had no idea what was going on under the covers. But the A+ company became like a D- within the course of 3 months. And so the talent they bring to the table during the course of the project, you really want to, like, get a good feeling like these guys are in it for the long haul, and make sure that there isn't this high churn within the organization. Red flag is if, the organization has had multiple acquisitions of other smaller players, and now they're bringing in all new talent, and, or they're two SIs that have merged together. There's going to be pain internally, and there's always fallout. Not that it's necessarily bad in general, but you need to make sure that there's not a lot of activity that is leading to this strife internally. The other thing with churn is you want to make sure that the organization, the consultants have not only do they have good industry experience, but they've been with the organization for some time. It doesn't have to be 15 years. That you don't see that in consulting necessarily. On the other hand, you don't want, when you look up your consultant on LinkedIn, them to have 4 job changes in the last 6 years. So again, we're getting into people issues, but I guess consulting is people, right? So looking at some of these HR trends really relates to the team that you're going to get assigned. And so make sure there hasn't been that churn within the SI organization, because that will roll downhill and it will affect you.
Yeah. Yeah. And coming back to the whole red flag, top performer, low performer discussion here, I want to pop up this question again for those that didn't answer, but we'd love to hear from you what your general experience has been with system integrators, just in general. Has it been A, great, B, terrible, or C, mixed? Love to hear your feedback in the chat here. And while we're getting more responses to that question, Bonnie, what about cultural fit? When you talk about cultural fit between a client and the system integrator, is that something that shows up in your data? Does it affect overall project success? What do you think?
Yeah. And that term cultural fit, it's so vague, right? It's difficult to determine, and maybe a cultural fit is with your team one day, but all of a sudden the culture of your own organization has changed and now it's a mismatch. Or your leadership has changed, and so it feels like it's a mismatch. So culture is a tough one to really put a box around necessarily. However, what are some of the things that make a fit good feel good, right? It is about the team that is assembled from their side of things, and and that there are people on that team that you feel, hey, these guys could be an extension of our team. They operate like us. They have good, general skill, follow-up hygiene, right? They're responsive. You're going to see this demonstrated really well. How in the sales process are they showing that they are communicating that they understand our needs? If that isn't clear during the sales process, that ain't going to get better during the project. So, things like communication and how are they documenting even what they hear during the discovery process or selection process. That's like a really good leading indicator of what's going to be like. I would say some of the best projects we see are the ones that actually name the consultant that worked on the project. And so the ones that have an actual person's name on them are usually rated a 9 or a 10, because they want that person to get recognized internally within their own SI organization as really been a champion for the client. So again, back to our people issues, it's, who is this team that you're putting in front of me? Not necessarily the brand, right? Because we see better success with some of these smaller independent firms than we do the big 6. By 2 points in implementation, right? So some of the smaller, SI firms are really providing such a better overall experience for clients than some of the big 6 are, in so many cases.
Yeah, very interesting. What about, has there been a shift toward industry specific and verticalized solutions? So in other words, like the SIs that are focused on certain industries, certain functions, is that a trend, or are you seeing the opposite potentially?
I think single-threaded, industry-specific SIs are, there's plenty of them there. I think they offer a great depth of knowledge that some of the broader organizations can't, because their focus is so much on, let's say, healthcare or education, or public sector. And those are sort of like these industries that are, I don't want to say like the oddballs, but they are the oddballs, right? Because they're super complex in their own, and it really is helpful to have a strength and a focus on just those industries, to eat, sleep, breathe those industries. So I think the results with those specialty areas is really good. Where that falls down is sometimes all of a sudden they've been, you see an SI has been really successful in, one area, and then all of a sudden, oh, well, we're going to open up a new practice. And now we can also do retail. Well, that's where things get a little bit kludgy. With that said, I think there are organizations, if you can get an organization to provide you with very specific references by industry or geo, those are like sort of indicators in terms of what is the experience rate with somebody like me. So it's not enough to just get a reference from, if you're in retail and they're giving you a reference in manufacturing, let's say, you want another client who deals with, a retail workforce to provide that feedback, or, some of the ramifications of supply chain management, or, those sort of issues. If you're in manufacturing, that the retail guys are not necessarily going to know. So,
right. Now, what about misconceptions? What are the biggest misconceptions organizations still have about system integrators when you look at some of this data?
That because you recognize the name of a consulting firm, that they're going to do a good job.
Right.
I mean, that's the biggest one. They're big enough to advertise at the airport or sponsor my vendor's, rock band. So they must be able to deliver, right? Or they say they have 10,000, customers, and I recognize all these big logos. That's meaningless, right? All of those areas, all of those projects are potentially in a completely different area than you're looking at. And so I think that's the biggest misconception. Nobody got fired for choosing XYZ big SI firm. They may have not gotten fired necessarily, but they wasted a whole bunch of money and time and pain on projects that didn't go well either. So, that could have been a lot better with a vetted independent. So I would say that's a big one, is that just because they're a big name SI, and maybe they're the platinum sponsor of, the vendor's customer conference, that does not equate at all to customer success.
Yeah, you said something right there in passing that's super important, that bias that's introduced into the ecosystems by the vendors, because the vendors want the SI, not necessarily the SI who has the highest rating on Raven Intel. They want the SI that has the best track record of selling software and closing more business. So they're going to go to that platinum sponsor every time, because that platinum sponsor is presumably really good at selling, and that's how they became a platinum sponsor.
Also the vendor is going to probably walk them in the door as well, which kills me, because that is not the right approach. On the other hand, I understand why, right? Those vendors rely on those big name SIs to sell a lot more software than the independents could. However, that doesn't necessarily equate to a happy delivery experience or the right fit when your software vendor walks in the door. So if you are a customer and looking at the implementation, don't go with the firm just because your rep from your software vendor, introduced you. Make sure you're doing your own homework.
Yeah. Yeah. And the irony of the whole nobody ever get fired for hiring, insert big name here. The irony of it all is that, first of all, I can name a lot of people that have been fired for hiring one of those people. Second of all, of the ones that didn't get fired, some of them got sued the vendor. But also, it's the other part of that is just that the big name is almost used as a as a CYA when things do hit the fan. So when things go poorly, you can say, well, I hired Accenture, I hired Deloitte, whatever. So what else could I have done? And it creates this sort of helplessness, learned helplessness, where it's like, what was I supposed to do? I hired the big guys, so there's nothing, I couldn't have done anything any better than I did. And it kind of leads to this question that I want to get your thoughts to in addition to what I just said, Bonnie, but this is from Darian on LinkedIn. She says, how can clients vet churn risk before signing with an SI? And I actually might want to broaden that question a little bit and say, how do you manage these SIs, whether it's the resources they bring, the methodologies they use when it doesn't quite fit what it is you need, or, they're pushing on you to use standard off the shelf functionality, but that doesn't necessarily work for your business. How do you level the playing field more so you're not so dependent on the SI to take more of an outsourced approach and allow you to take more ownership of the project? What are some tips you have for us there?
Yeah. Well, I would say, the statement of work is a very important document because it defines the roles and responsibilities that contractually you are paying for with an SI. And so know what is in there and what is not in there, and make sure that it's not just you, if you're the executive, signing the contract, that knows exactly what those things are, but that every person on your project team reads those, what's in the SOW. Because sometimes the problem is not necessarily that the SI didn't define things well. It's the project team never really saw or understood the statement of work. So they were asking for things that weren't included. So I would say your statement of work is your operations guide. And if something isn't necessarily in there, how can I manage my SI? You want to know what can you manage, right? What can you control with the relationship? And your statement of work is contractually what you can control. So I would say number one, an understanding of that statement of work. Number two, you can't just throw the keys to your SI and, say, go ahead and, drive us somewhere. You have to be the passenger coach, navigating as well, right? So whoever gets assigned from your team needs to be as solid of a team leader as the team or the guys that you hire. So if you put a B player managing the project, you're going to get B results, right? Even if you hire the A player. So internally, you got to have your A team managing the project as well. You can't give it to, the folks who have time because they're not really proficient at their jobs. So, sometimes you gotta line up your A resources internally at the same time as you got your A game with your SI going too. So that's the other way. And then, to the point of how do you manage churn, that specific question that was asked, again, statement of work, getting the named consultants in there is really important. And so contractually, you can go back to your SI and say, hey, you told us this person wasn't going to change. So now you owe us something, or here's the repercussions of when it did happen unexpectedly that we want to hold you to. So all of this to say, I think making sure that you're lined up with the A team, everybody knows what the scope of the project is, not just your decision maker. And, contractually, you have the people's names within your contract will really ensure that things will go from a team perspective well.
Yeah. Oh, I love the car analogy about how you wouldn't just hand the keys and say, take me to the beach without being more specific about, what kind of beach and where and how do you want to get there. I think you need to be, as the co-driver, you need to be a lot like my wife. She's very opinionated. She has a very strong vision of how I should be driving, which direction I should go, what speed I should go, whether I ride people's asses or not on the highway. She has very strong opinions about that stuff. And kidding aside, though, you kind of need to be that way for managing your SI. You don't want them just blindly guiding you down the path.
Well, and she's make sure that your kids are in the back of the car as well, not left at home. So a 1,000,000%, a lot of parallels there. She's also going to tell you where to park.
Exactly. And that I'm too close to the line and that I should do it over again. But this isn't marital therapy here. This is
right.
We're talking about system. I've lost track of what topic we're talking about here. Um, so if you give one piece of advice to organizations selecting a technology implementer here in 2025, what would it be? What would that one takeaway be that you think is most important?
Trust but verify. So, do your homework on who you are getting lined up to guide you on your way. It's so important. But don't take what they are telling you at face value only, or don't just check one or two references. Really get behind the scenes in terms of asking the hard questions and getting the proof from other clients who have gone through it. Again, Raven is a free resource. You can do that. We can help you, vet partners as well. If you're unsure, and give you some questions that you might use to get at some real answers. But trust but verify, and make sure that your statement of work really is that document that's going to line you up for the best success possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. I appreciate you being here today. And what a better closing comment than from Sam Graham on LinkedIn, who says, "This old dog learns new tricks every Tuesday." I do too. That's why I love doing these podcasts, because I learn from people like Bonnie, and that's why I have people on here that are smarter than me. And I appreciate you being here, Bonnie. This is great stuff. How can people tell us, remind us again how to get to your website? How do we connect with you? All that good stuff.
Absolutely. RavenIntel.com. I'm Bonnie at RavenIntel.com as well, or Bonnie Tinder at RavenIntel.com. So drop me a line, link in with me. Happy to talk all things implementation and partner success.
Yep. And if you're watching on LinkedIn, I've tagged her in the event page here that you're watching from, so you could find her easily there. And I really appreciate you being here today, Bonnie, and look forward to having you on again next time. And thank you to the audience for the great questions. Same time, same place every Tuesday. We do these interviews. You'll see this interview become part of the Transformation Ground Control podcast that gets released next week. So thank you for being here for the live production of the podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Third Stage Consulting, how we can help you choose an SI or help you through a selection or digital strategy project, or even help you with the implementation, change management, all the stuff that goes into a successful implementation. We're tech agnostic. We've worked with over 400 different clients, and happy to help you and brainstorm ideas on how to make your project successful. Feel free to reach out to me as well. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I've included my contact information below if you want to email me or reach out in other avenues. So have a great week. Hope you